All right, good morning, everybody. And as Harrison mentioned, what I'll do is walk you through a little bit from WFP Aviation side, and the scope changes a little bit from what we've been talking about so far. So on this first slide, what I sincerely hope is that next year, on the index, on the legend on the bottom left, you see some of our land, sea routes, and our air routes. What I sincerely hope is that by June, when we have our fly event, that we actually have a UAS RPAS route to add for you. So a little bit of an overview on WFP. Our country office is well represented here, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot about a lot of things we do, but what I want to focus on is where we're focusing on RPAS. So this is not a typo. What our interest is in a 1.5 metric ton payload. Again, that's payload. That's not weight of the RPAS. So that's what we're focusing on right now. We're working with the state and the region through several items, and I'll go through that process. But we also have a coordination cell that we're working on for other UAS and RPAS matters. So some of those things include aerial assessments, also something called HAPS, high altitude platform or Sweatte satellites or pseudo-satellites. You might know that as Google Loon. Mobile towers, we utilize those in Puerto Rico where AT&T put up some connectivity for us. Delivery of smaller items, we have a couple of projects we're working on that I also hope to announce, but weren't just quite ready. So we're working on several small cargo items. We will talk about a risk-based approach. So how do we plan on getting that larger RPAS up in the air, considering safety primarily? And again, that leads right to that large cargo delivery and then future engagements. So considering regulations, a basis for regulations around the world is Annex 2. That's known as Rules of the Road, but in teaching drone workshops, both for ICAO and for WFP around the world, sometimes some of the drone or UAS pilots aren't very familiar, so the best analogy I can use is rules of the road. It's a separation, a method to fly, and quite simply avoiding other aircraft and respecting people and property on the ground. So those are very, very simple, high-level view. But also, Annex 2 talks about the requirement for a special authorization. And if you're interested, if you get into Annex 2, go straight to Appendix 4 in the back. That's all unmanned aircraft. But another item that we use, so I'm going to kind of go through our toolkit now that we utilize to build this authorization when we go to a CAA. This is actually in the back of the RPAS manual, and it's an application for a special authorization. It's 4 pages with, I think, about 7 pages of instructions. It's not super complicated, but for somebody that's never done one, it would be a good starting point for a CONOPS or an operational risk assessment. And SMS, not going to do the deep dive into SMS here. Obviously, there's not time, but obviously, it's a backbone for the risk-based approach. And the main thing I want to point out here is, other than the process being a loop, but that the operational approval, and so our operation, to the best of our ability, if the state does not have drone regulations or RPAS regulations, is to go in and take the ICAO annexes, best practices from around the world, and use their manned rules. So at the end of the day, when we all agree on the best path forward, they will add also a set of conditions and limitations to say, yeah, Cliff, we really like all those things, but we still want these 22 things, and those are usually types of mitigations. So at the end of the day, The regulator, and that might be an air navigation service provider, or it might be the Civil Aviation Authority itself, will accept that risk before we go forward. They say, yeah, with all these things you've generated here, we're comfortable that this project can fly safely. This is a picture of an actual operation. The little corridor there is not unlike a UTM project. This project utilized something called an ALTRAV, Alpha Lima Tango Romeo Victor. It's what NASA uses for a space shuttle launch, or Edwards, several of the other launch sites. So that little corridor there is only a mile wide and 400 feet in altitude, but it can move. So why lock an airspace up in this area? There's a lot of man traffic going up and down the coast. Also, it was in a very defense-sensitive area. So why lock it up if we're not using it? It can actually move in real time as the drone would go offshore. UTM, we just had the professionals talk to you about UTM, but one thing I do want to highlight is unmanned aircraft, and I would ask all of the operators here and the civil aviation authorities, what is your method of detect and avoid? So I heard the discussion, I heard ADS-B, I heard talk about transponders. Are any of those TSO'd, or does it have a technical standard order? And you might just say, Cliff, I don't know. But, you might end up in a state where they go, well, is that approved? Has it been through the certification process? So whatever method you use, and the UTM is a great one. So creating that route, maybe it's just segregating airspace, so technically no one else can come in, but it's a consideration. So one of the other pieces that we would utilize would be a flight plan. This is actual ICAO flight plan. So in that, we're now assuming, this would assume that a state maybe is in the process of creating the regulations, and they're saying, well, Cliff, we still don't have them all vetted yet, but we would bring this ICAO flight plan and say, let's use this. And, these are just a few of the small things. This particular aircraft is painted this color for a reason. It's called conspicuity, because many of the drones or RPAS, UAS, are stealthy by design. So when you look at one straight on, you're not seeing them very well. So in a turn, both the bottom and the top are very visible. Some will have very high visibility lighting, but for a lot of the electrical battery ones, powered units, you're putting an immediate drain on the battery that it can't sustain. So, it just depends on what kind of conspicuity possibilities you have. And can you use ADS-B transponder? Those are just other methods. And so where does that get us? What we're actually talking about here is our goal at WFP. Again, we have a litany of use cases we're looking for, but ultimately, in the very near future, we're actually looking to operate with this RPAS. Have the video, please. So we're just about wrapping here. I've just got another slide. So again, One thing I want to make clear, WFP is not an operator. So we actually have the operator here, Astral Aviation from Nairobi, that we have a letter of interest signed to operate this flyox for us in the coming days, hopefully, or coming months. So I just want to make that clear. But WFP, our role is to serve as facilitators with our operators, so they have a whole protocol and process, and our duty is to collaborate with other UN members, other civil aviation authorities to enable operations. Whoops, can you advance that, please? Thank you. And that's it. Just one comment on the slide here. So this is a picture from the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C., the Udvar Hazy Museum. And the reason I have the slide there, not only because the Scan Eagle was inducted into that museum, I think it was a year and a half ago, but the essence of it is, according to Annex 2 and rules in this particular state, that Scan Eagle is an aircraft, and all manned rules apply. And the entity flying it, be it a man or woman, is a pilot. So again, rules apply to them. Thank you very much for your time today.